Joachim Peiper is remembered today as a convicted war criminal who was responsible for the bloody massacre of US Army prisoners of war in the Malmedy Massacre. During the Second World War he was rather senior and served Heinrich Himmler as an adjutant, and he was seen as a valued member of the SS. He personally saw the mass murder that was implemented by Himmler inside of the concentration camps, and he also served as a tank commander on the Eastern and Western Front and with his battle group Kampfgruppe Peiper, who became notorious for their involvement in war crimes against prisoners of war and civilians. After the Second World War, he was brought to trial and was investigated for war crimes. However, he was sentenced to death, but this was commuted to time in prison based on how the US soldiers treated him during his interrogation and imprisonment. Because of this, it was viewed that he escaped justice in the post-war trials, especially for his slaughter of American soldiers, but in France his location was discovered in the 1970s, and he was brutally slaughtered by anti-Nazis. So join us today as we look at the brutal post-war execution of Joachim Peiper, and remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. Joachim Peiper was born in Berlin on the 30th of January 1915 and was from a middle-class family. His father was a soldier in the German army, and his father also took part in the Freikorps movement and was angry at the fact Germany had lost the First World War. At the age of 11, Joachim became a Boy Scout, and through this he became interested in pursuing a career in the military. His elder brother joined the SS and later became a guard inside a concentration camp, seeing action also in Poland where he was killed. However, Joachim, when 18, joined the Hitler Youth. He volunteered for the SS and then joined the Cavalry SS and was promoted a number of times. His reputation caught the attention of Heinrich Himmler, and to Himmler, Peiper was the ideal Aryan and someone who personified the master race promoted by the Nazis. He was sent on military leadership courses and received positive reviews from his instructors. However, psychologists noted that he had a negative attitude and wished to impress others with his personal relationship to Himmler. He continued to serve inside of the SS, training to be an officer, and whilst at the school, he was also taught the Nazi anti-Semitic values they promoted to devastating effect. He served a tour of duty with a tank division, and Himmler saw him as a promising SS leader. He then served as a staff officer inside of the anteroom of the SS main office in Berlin, and his friendship with Himmler flourished, and he was considered a favourite assistant. Peiper was always present when Himmler went on visits in official capacities. When the Nazis invaded Poland in September 1939, Peiper travelled on the personal train of Himmler, and he was also party to meetings with Hitler when the Führer travelled with Rommel and other Wehrmacht and SS generals. Peiper personally saw the brutality of the German officers who carried out mass executions of the Polish population, and he was noted to have been a witness to these. He also witnessed the actions he thought poison gas killings of disabled and mentally ill people inside of psychiatric hospitals. Together with Himmler, Peiper travelled and conducted many inspections of concentration camps in Nazi Germany, and he was involved in arranging the deportations of Jews from cities such as Warsaw and Lublin. As they continued their concentration camp tour, they witnessed more euthanasia and executions. As Germany invaded France, Peiper became a platoon leader of a tank division. He was awarded the Iron Cross Second Class and later awarded the Iron Cross First Class, and he scored many victories. He was then told of the impending invasion of the Soviet Union, and he had 4 months to prepare Waffen-SS soldiers of Kampfgruppe Peiper for conflict with the Red Army. He continued with Himmler to travel to occupied lands, observing the ghettos instilled during the occupation of Poland, and he witnessed firsthand the brutality of German soldiers. He was present in June 1941 for a conference in which Himmler debated the plans for killing 30 million Slavs in Europe and Russia, and when the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union began, Peiper was personally there to inspect the work of the Einsatzgruppen, who were executing thousands of civilians by gunshot. He rejoined the fight on the Eastern Front, and Peiper wrote of close combat fighting with the Soviets, and he was known for war crimes himself. Upon entering a village on the Eastern Front, Peiper and his men discovered 25 Germans killed by partisans and Soviets, and for this he ordered the burning down of the whole village and for all the inhabitants of the village to be shot dead. His unit was known as a Blowtorch Battalion for their slaughter of 2 Soviet villages, where all inhabitants were shot and killed, with the villages scorched and burned. Hundreds were killed in Peiper's actions, and it was stated he himself was eager to execute the order to burn the villages. His group were known for their terror, and he was proud of this reputation. Peiper became used as a propaganda hero for his leadership inside the Waffen-SS, and he was also used in Italy, with Kampfgruppe Peiper seeing action. However, on the 19th of September 1943, partisan guerrillas of the Italian resistance movement killed 1 soldier and captured 2 close to Boves in northwest Italy. During a firefight with partisans, the Germans failed to rescue the men, and after this Kampfgruppe Peiper were in control of the roads in and out of the village, and Peiper ordered the partisans that he would destroy the whole village if they did not release the SS men. A local priest negotiated the release of the prisoners, and the body of the SS soldier killed early was recovered. However, Peiper, despite getting his wish, then ordered his men to kill 24 inside the village, and they also killed a woman, looting and burning her house in the process. Peiper's combat experience continued during the Battle of Normandy, and he was withdrawn following a short stint on the Eastern Front and was sent to Belgium. He was involved in training new recruits, and the difficult training for Kampfgruppe Peiper even resulted in 5 men being shot dead for not being of the standard required. Following Operation Overlord, he was based around Pas de Calais, but was rarely used on the front lines. He did suffer a nervous breakdown and was relieved from command on the 2nd of August 1944 and went into hospital for treatment. He returned to the front lines in time for the Battle of the Bulge and the counter-offensive that saw the American army dig in against the Germans. He commanded Kampfgruppe Peiper, which was the best equipped battle group with the huge Tiger II tanks. He tried to capture bridges over the rivers, but Peiper during this operation was noted for conducting a number of massacres. In particular, he and his soldiers were responsible for the Malmedy Massacre. His armoured units were confronted by a lightly armed convoy of American vehicles at the Bowneggs crossroads, and they quickly surrendered to the Germans. However, the American troops had been gathered in a field near the crossroads, and furious because of the delay caused by the skirmish, Joachim Peiper had his men execute and massacre 84 American soldiers, with their corpses left in the snow for weeks for the Americans to find. More murder came in other Belgian towns and villages, and eventually Kampfgruppe Peiper were isolated and cut off. This led to Peiper and his men abandoning their tanks and retreating. However, after the war, Joachim Peiper was sentenced to death for his involvement in the Malmedy Massacre and other atrocities conducted by the unit under his command. At trial, he complained that he was tortured for information and for confessions, and that this had been obtained through inappropriate interrogation. Because of this, Peiper's death sentence, which would have seen him being hanged, was then commuted to time in prison, and over the next decade, all of those who had been imprisoned in the trial had been freed. Peiper's death sentence initially was commuted to 35 years in prison, and then was commuted further, and he was released in December 1956 from Landsberg prison. By 1956 and his release, he was a bitter man who had personally had his most high-profile days behind him, rubbing shoulders with Himmler and Hitler. He went on to work for Volkswagen in a dealership in sales and stated in a post-war interview, "I was a Nazi and I remain one. The Germany of today is no longer a great nation. It has become a province of Europe. That is why at the first opportunity I shall settle elsewhere, in France no doubt. I don't care for Frenchmen, but I love France." New court proceedings emerged in 1968, with Peiper accused of killing Italian civilians, but the court ruled that there was insufficient evidence for any formal charges to go ahead. During the winter of 1970, Joachim Peiper, now around 55, moved to a small house he and his wife had built in Travers. The French authorities had granted him permission to live there, knowing full well who he was and his background, and he was allowed to live. The family were not particularly well off, but as his children were grown up, Peiper and his wife lived comfortably. They had a sufficient amount of land too, and wished to live quietly, not to attract any attention. Their house was rather modest, with trees and a barbed wire fence securing Peiper's land. Despite the Peipers living a quiet life and keeping themselves to themselves, they did have some friends inside the village, but a hate campaign began in June 1976. On the 21st of June, leaflets were distributed throughout the village, saying "People of Travers, a war criminal SS Peiper is amongst us," and it then talked about the need to expel him from France, and then this was picked up by national newspapers. There was outrage across France that the man who had inflicted such massacre and suffering was allowed to settle in France. Within a few days, all of the national and international media were running stories, and along the walls and road surfaces in the local area, swastikas, SS runes and Peiper's name were painted. Peiper complained to the police, and they said they would guard his property during the day but not at night, and the West German embassy in Paris advised him to leave. However, he conducted an interview with a newspaper at the time, 2 days after the leaflets were distributed, and said when asked about his past as a Nazi, "This is a ridiculous question. I was young and idealistic against Bolshevism. I do not understand why people keep dragging up history. As the Italians say, coffee is cold. It's time for reconciliation in Europe. I was not political. I was never a member of the Nazi Party. I was a soldier." In July, threats emerged against Peiper's life and his property, and he was sent letters and was subject to telephone calls, saying his house would be burned down and his dogs killed. There was no specific threat to kill him, but during this time his wife left for her own safety. Peiper felt like his house had become an entrenched camp, and things got rather tense. Peiper said he was not worried, as he did not believe those making threats would carry out anything substantial, and he was armed with a Colt 38 revolver and a 22 caliber rifle to defend himself. He was also given a shotgun to further bolster his arsenal, and these were loaded at all times. On Bastille Day, on the 14th of July 1976, the attack upon Peiper's house came. In the early hours, sirens were heard and flames were coming from Peiper's house. The local fire brigade arrived and found their pump was not working, which slowed down the efforts to extinguish the fire, and when it was put out, they eventually found the charred remains of a body inside of the study. The remains of Joachim Peiper had shrunk to around 60 centimetres long due to how intense the fire was, and it was said they were barely recognisable as to belonging to a human. His identity was confirmed, and under his body the police found a fire-damaged rifle with a case in the chamber, and nearby was a revolver with 5 rounds that had been fired from the cylinder. A further 13 unfired rounds were found from the rifle in the next room, and on the terrace they found 3 shotgun cartridges from the one given to him. They had been fired, and there was a strong smell of powder. By looking at the garden, there were traces of shot near an oak tree, around 10 metres from the house, and it's believed that Peiper tried to shoot those that attacked his house. Both of his dogs had been wounded, and there were bullets found in their kennels. Forensics confirmed a number of things. The Joachim Peiper had tried to save some clothes belonging to his wife by throwing them out of the house and onto the veranda, and Peiper's watch was also found on his body. This had stopped at 1 a.m, with the clock in the house stopping 7 minutes later. Experts in arson stated that the fire had begun at the back of the house near to the road and had taken hold very quickly. It was started by Molotov cocktails, and the remains of one was found nearby outside the house, with Peiper's house being firebombed. It was also found that the wire fence between the garden and the meadow had been cut with wire cutters, and that from this Peiper had spotted the attackers and shot at them. He shot all 3 weapons at them, and there was no evidence of other weapons being fired towards the house. It's believed that Peiper shot his shotgun from the terrace to put off the attackers, and as the fire engulfed his house, he entered the house again to save important papers and some of his wife's clothes. After throwing these out the window, he tried to defend himself by firing other weapons, however was overcome by the smoke and then collapsed, dying inside the fire. After the death of Joachim Peiper, an anti-Nazi group, named the Avengers, emerged reporting to the London Times that they were responsible, and shortly after, Peiper's charred house was a brief tourist attraction, with local people wishing to catch a glimpse of the burned-out house of the former SS commander. Joachim Peiper was a brutal and savage leader within the Waffen-SS, who was responsible for the deaths of thousands in war crimes and atrocities. He was highly linked to the leadership of the SS, and he personally saw the crimes of genocide committed by the Nazis inside of the concentration camps. His death came 30 years after the Second World War had come to an end, and many viewed it as a reprisal for the crimes he had ordered and committed during the earlier decades. However, one thing does strike a chord, and it's the most reasonable course of action with Peiper after the Second World War, which would have resulted in his execution for war crimes during the subsequent war crimes trials. It's most likely he would have been executed if those guards had not tortured him and beaten him during his interrogation. The burning of Peiper during Bastille Day 1976 was shocking even nonetheless. Once again, thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.